You ever watch someone make a complete fool of themselves in real time and somehow still believe they're right? That's exactly what happened when my neighbor Karen, yes, a full-blown HOA Karen, decided to call the police on my wife, claiming she was trespassing at our lake cabin. Now, mind you, this isn't some disputed land or shady Airbnb situation. This cabin has been in my wife's family for 3 generations. The deed is crystal clear, and it's in her name only. But that didn't stop Karen from jumping to conclusions and trying to flex her so-called HOA authority like it was a badge of law. The truth is, she had no legal standing. But when has a power-hungry Karen ever let facts get in the way? Get started on a warm Saturday afternoon. My wife, Emily, had gone ahead to our lake property to set things up for our son's birthday weekend. I had some work deadlines and planned to join her the following morning. The cabin was only about an hour and a half away from our main home, tucked quietly along a peaceful lake, surrounded by woods and a few neighboring homes. It was her family's retreat spot for decades. Her grandfather built it with his own hands back in the late 1960s. The land itself was purchased before the area even had paved roads, let alone an HOA. That's important because while some of the newer homes nearby are part of the local homeowners association, ours is not and never has been. So. When Emily pulled up to the cabin that day, she noticed a woman a few lots down, watching her as she unlocked the front gate. Emily didn't think much of it. She's used to Karen's eyes, following her like a security camera. Karen's always been nosy, the kind of person who acts like she owns the whole lake just because she attends monthly HOA meetings. She once yelled at a FedEx driver for turning around in her driveway. Another time, she knocked on our cabin door to tell us that our campfire smoke was invading her breathing space. Keep in mind, her property is about 100 feet away and downhill from ours. She's one of those ... Anyway, Emily started unloading supplies, party decorations, food, some outdoor chairs, when she heard yelling from a distance. Karen was standing at the edge of the property line, hands on hips, yelling something about how she didn't recognize her and needed proof she belonged there. Emily, thinking this was another one of her delusional episodes, simply waved her off and continued setting up. That's when Karen said she was calling the police. Emily thought she was bluffing. I would have thought so too, honestly. But no, Karen wasn't joking. Within 20 minutes, a sheriff's SUV pulled up the gravel road, lights flashing. Now, imagine being a woman alone at your own family cabin, unloading groceries, and suddenly being approached by 2 officers responding to a potential trespassing report. It was surreal. Emily stayed calm. She's not one to panic easily. She explained the situation and calmly showed them her driver's license, which matched the name on the digital copy of the deed she keeps saved on her phone. Smart woman, always prepared. The officer looked it over, nodded, and even commented that everything checked out perfectly. Then he turned to Karen, who was now walking toward them with her phone out, recording like she was the one being wronged. She started ranting about the HOA, claiming that all cabins in the area must be approved by the board and that she had never seen this woman before. That's when the officer, bless his patience, interrupted her and said, "Ma'am, this property belongs to her. It's on record. You're actually on the edge of her property line right now." Karen blinked, confused, like the concept of not being in charge had never occurred to her. But she wasn't done yet. There must be a mistake, she argued. This cabin can't be in her name. It doesn't even match the HOA's registry. I've lived here for 12 years, and I know everyone who's allowed to use this land. That's when Emily stepped in. Karen, with all due respect, your HOA has nothing to do with this property. My grandfather bought this land before the HOA even existed. We've never been a part of it, and we're not subject to any of its rules. And as far as being allowed to use it, I don't need your permission to be on land I own. She said it clearly, firmly, and politely, which made it all the more powerful. The officers didn't even need to say anything more. They told Karen that unless she had actual evidence of wrongdoing, which she didn't, she needed to leave and stop making false accusations. Now. If Karen had any sense, she would have apologized and walked away. But not this one. She glared, took a few dramatic steps backward, and said, "I'm going to report this to the HOA board. They'll deal with you." Emily just smiled, waved, and said, "Good luck with that." The officers chuckled quietly as they got back in their vehicle and left. When Emily called me that evening to tell me what happened, I was furious but not surprised. Karen had always been a thorn in our side. But this crossed a line. You don't call the cops on someone for being at their own home. What if our son had been there? What if Emily hadn't had the deed handy? What if the officers weren't as professional as they were? It could have gone a lot worse. Karen thought she was protecting the neighborhood, but in reality, she was just flexing imaginary power and exposing her ignorance. What she didn't realize, though, was that her stunt would end up backfiring badly. And soon, she'd learn just how deep of a hole she really dug for herself. After that shocking incident at the cabin, we expected Karen would back off, maybe even feel a little embarrassed for wasting the police's time. But no, Karen wasn't the type to admit she was wrong. In fact, she doubled down. By Monday morning, we had received a long-winded email from the HOA board titled Notice of Violation, claiming that our cabin was in direct conflict with current HOA regulations and that we were required to submit property documentation for official review. I nearly spit out my coffee, laughing. They had zero authority over our property. It was like getting a parking ticket from a guy pretending to be a cop. We weren't part of their HOA, never signed any agreement, and legally weren't bound to any of their rules or restrictions. Our land deed made that crystal clear, and yet here they were, sending threats like they owned the shoreline. The letter was filled with HOA buzzwords like compliance expectations, shared community aesthetic, and environmental responsibility. They even demanded we halt all activities on the property, including upcoming gatherings, until we had their express approval. Emily just rolled her eyes and said, "They really don't know who they're messing with." See, Karen wasn't just acting on her own. She had somehow convinced the board to take action against us based entirely on her version of the events. It was ridiculous, but unfortunately, not surprising. Karen had been on the board for years and treated it like her personal kingdom. She used her position to intimidate neighbors, enforce rules that didn't exist, and insert herself into everyone's business. And now she was aiming that HOA muscle at us. But here's the thing, we were ready. This wasn't our first rodeo with nosy neighbors or power-hungry board members. Emily immediately contacted the county records office and requested a certified copy of the property deed showing that not only was the cabin outside of the HOA's jurisdiction, but it had never once been part of it. We also reached out to a real estate attorney friend of mine who had dealt with HOA boundary disputes before. Within 24 hours, we had a legal response drafted and delivered to the HOA, stating clearly that they were overstepping their bounds, and any further harassment would be met with formal legal action. We attached a scanned copy of the certified deed, highlighted the parcel number, and included historical documentation that showed the property was developed decades before the HOA was formed. That should have ended things. A reasonable person would have apologized and moved on. But Karen, she wasn't reasonable. A few days later, while Emily and I were at the cabin preparing for our son's birthday party, Karen showed up again, uninvited, standing at the end of our driveway with a clipboard in one hand and a measuring tape in the other. She looked like she was conducting some sort of inspection, pacing the perimeter like a building inspector from a bad reality show. Emily walked out to meet her, calm but firm. "Can I help you with something, Karen?" she asked. Karen replied, without making eye contact, just verifying setbacks. "Your structure may be encroaching on protected lakefront boundaries. This is still under investigation by the HOA Review Committee." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emily smiled and said, "Karen, this land isn't under HOA review. There is no committee that governs our property. The county records confirm that. If you step 1 foot past that marker, you'll be trespassing, and we will call the sheriff." Again, Karen gave her a tight-lipped smile, turned, and walked away muttering something under her breath. But that wouldn't be the last we'd see of her. 2 days later, we received another notice from the HOA, this time claiming our outdoor fire pit was a safety hazard and must be removed immediately. They even included a photo of it, clearly taken without our consent. That was the final straw. I sent the board a direct email with our attorney, CC'd, warning them that continued attempts to interfere with our private property rights would be grounds for a civil suit. I wasn't bluffing. We had already begun documenting everything, including Karen's visits, photos she took without permission, and the bogus violations they were fabricating. What made it all so ridiculous was how obvious Karen's motives were. This wasn't about rules, or safety, or aesthetics. It was about control. She couldn't stand that someone existed outside her little HOA bubble. Our independence offended her. We weren't subject to her authority, and that drove her mad. But instead of accepting it and moving on, she kept pushing, trying to use fear, intimidation, and bureaucracy to force us into compliance. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood started catching on. People began reaching out quietly, telling us that they'd had similar experiences with Karen. Some had been fined for things like hanging wind chimes or painting their sheds the wrong color. Others were threatened with violations for parking on their own lawns. Karen, it turned out, had a long history of using the HOA as a weapon, but no one had ever pushed back until now. Emily and I decided to go one step further. We printed out a public statement and tacked it to the community bulletin board, detailing our property's legal status and reminding everyone that HOA jurisdiction only applied to signed members, not adjacent landowners. We included copies of the county parcel map, our deed, and a legal memo from our attorney. Within days, the chatter started. People were beginning to question the board's authority and Karen's behavior. That weekend, Karen didn't show her face once, no clipboard, no camera, no pacing around our property lines. For the first time in months, our cabin felt peaceful again. But we weren't naive. We knew she wasn't done yet. Karen was the type to go quiet before launching her next petty move, but now we had the truth, the law, and the neighborhood on our side. Her power was slipping, and she knew it. Just when we thought Karen might have learned her lesson, she pulled her boldest and dumbest move yet. It had been a quiet couple of weeks at the lake. Emily and I had gone back and forth between home and the cabin, cleaning up after our son's birthday party and trying to enjoy a few peaceful days. But that calm didn't last. One Thursday morning, I got a call from Emily while I was still in the city. I answered, expecting a grocery list or maybe a question about weekend plans. Instead, her voice was sharp. "You're not going to believe. This Karen filed a complaint with the county. She's trying to get a formal investigation opened into our cabin zoning, environmental impact, property access, the works." Asterisk, I blinked in disbelief. Wait, what? Based on what? We're not even in their HOA jurisdiction. Emily sighed. She sent in some ridiculous reports saying the property is being used improperly, the structure might be illegal, and that we're blocking access to a community lakefront path. There is no such path, by the way. She made it up. I felt the rage creeping in again. Karen had officially crossed over from being a nuisance to attempting to weaponize government bureaucracy against us. We weren't just talking about fake HOA notices anymore. This was her trying to cause legal trouble through the county. But what Karen didn't understand was that unlike the HOA board, the county doesn't just take someone's word as gospel. They deal with records, maps, inspections, and most of all, facts. Asterisk, the next day, a friendly county land use officer named Mr. Delgado gave Emily a call and scheduled a routine property review. Nothing urgent, just procedural. Because they had to investigate the complaint, no matter how flimsy, Emily welcomed it. "Please, come out. I'll have everything ready," she told him. When he arrived that weekend, she handed him a binder. In it, the full property history, zoning status, deed with parcel number, a survey map from 5 years ago, and even photos of the land before the HOA ever existed. Mr. Delgado was impressed. "Honestly, I wish everyone kept records like this," he said with a laugh. "I'll file the findings, but I can already tell there's no issue here. That complaint kind of feels personal." Emily smiled knowingly. "Oh, it is." Asterisk, to no one's surprise, Karen watched the whole visit from her porch, snapping photos of Mr. Delgado's car, probably thinking she had won some victory. The look on her face must have been priceless when he walked over to her afterward and told her, in front of her husband and another neighbor, "Everything is perfectly legal over there. You should probably stop filing complaints without evidence." And with that, he got in his truck and drove off. Emily called me right away, laughing. She was speechless. You could see her face turning purple. Asterisk, but Karen still wasn't done. A few days later, another email from the HOA arrived. This time, they accused us of violating visual harmony by flying a flag on the cabin's front porch. It was an American flag, not some neon eyesore or offensive banner. Just the stars and stripes, neatly mounted on a pole near the entrance. Karen had actually gotten the board to issue a formal notice asking us to remove it. That's when I stepped in. I replied to the board with a screenshot of federal law stating that HOAs and private associations cannot prohibit homeowners from displaying the American flag on their property. I underlined the part that said regardless of membership. I added a simple closing line. "You are now bordering on harassment." Asterisk, this seemed to hit a nerve. For the first time, the HOA responded with caution. "We were unaware of the specific details regarding your property. We will update our records accordingly. Please consider this matter closed." That was the crack in their armor we were waiting for. Karen's influence was clearly weakening. The board, previously eager to jump at her every suggestion, was now beginning to backpedal. Maybe they had spoken with Mr. Delgado. Maybe neighbors had started to complain. Either way, the tide was turning. Asterisk, and it wasn't just paperwork that was turning things around. Word was spreading among nearby residents. At a local cafe, a neighbor we barely knew approached Emily. "Hey, I heard about what Karen did too. You guys, she tried the same thing with us, when we painted our fence beige instead of white. She's nuts." Another couple emailed us privately, thanking us for standing up to her. "Everyone's been scared to say anything for years," they wrote, "but seeing you push back gave us hope." That was when Emily got the idea to start a Facebook group, not to rally against the HOA, but to give local property owners, members, and non-members alike a space to share information, rules, and rights. We called it Lakeview Neighbors United. Within a week, over 40 people had joined. Asterisk, as the group grew, so did the stories. Karen had tried to ban garden gnomes. She once fined a family for parking an RV on their own driveway, even though it was only there for 2 hours to load supplies. She harassed a retired veteran for flying a military service flag on Memorial Day. All of it, her fake rules, her intimidation, her threats, had gone unchecked for years. But now, her reign of petty terror was starting to crumble. One neighbor, who had remained quiet for years, posted a scanned letter from their lawyer showing that even they had been outside the HOA's authority, and they'd been paying dues for a decade out of fear. The board was now facing a flood of refund demands and angry emails. Karen, once the loudest voice in the neighborhood, had suddenly gone silent. No more late-night complaints, no more surprise inspections. She even stopped showing up to meetings. The president of the board announced she had stepped down from her leadership duties effective immediately, citing personal reasons. We all knew the truth. She wasn't just stepping down. She was retreating, defeated by facts, community unity, and her own arrogance. Looking back, it's almost funny how it all unraveled. One false accusation, one dumb decision to call the cops on my wife, started a chain reaction that exposed years of bad behavior. All Karen had to do was mind her own business. But instead, she tried to flex imaginary power over the wrong family. And now, she's the one avoiding eye contact while we sip coffee on our deck, waving politely, as neighbors drive by and honk. With Karen finally off the HOA board and the neighborhood beginning to breathe a little easier, you'd think things would quiet down. But when you've dealt with someone like Karen long enough, you start to learn that silence doesn't always mean surrender. It often means they're cooking up their next move. So while she was no longer out front with her measuring tape or writing fake violation notices, Emily and I stayed cautious. We weren't going to let our guard down just yet. Then came the twist we didn't expect. One evening, while Emily and I were grilling outside, our son came running over holding a folded piece of paper. This was taped to the gate, he said. I took one look at it and nearly laughed. It was a community mediation request, signed by none other than Karen. She was asking to meet his neighbors to discuss shared space concerns around lake access, noise, and land use. No official HOA letterhead this time, just her personal request. I showed it to Emily, who raised an eyebrow. She wants a truce. Or another power play, she asked. It sure looked like a weak attempt at rebuilding control, now that her influence had collapsed. We both knew it was probably just another angle. Still, we agreed to meet. But this time, we were bringing backup. We asked our new friend Dava, local who'd lived by the lake for 20 years and had more knowledge of zoning than most attorneys, to join us. Dave also wasn't in the HOA, and he'd had his own Karen encounters over the years. We met on neutral ground near the community dock. On a Saturday morning, Karen showed up in oversized sunglasses, holding a folder and trying her best to act civil. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page moving forward, she said, with a fake smile so forced it looked painful. She opened her folder and began going over a list of requests, most of which were absurd, limiting the number of guests we could have on weekends, reducing fire pit usage during quiet hours, trimming trees that blocked her view, and most hilariously asking that we voluntarily comply with community aesthetic guidelines, despite being outside HOA jurisdiction. She framed all of this as neighborly cooperation. I almost respected her commitment to the act, but Emily wasn't having it. Karen, she said, her tone firm but polite, we've already gone through this. Our land isn't part of the HOA. You have no say in how we use our cabin. And as far as blocking your view, that tree's been there longer than any house on this road. Karen's smile tightened. She tried to backpedal, insisting that it was all just about being good neighbors. That's when Dave chimed in. If you want to talk about neighborly behavior, let's start with calling the cops on someone on their own property and then filing a bogus county complaint. That shut her up for a moment. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. She mumbled something about misunderstandings and emotions running high, but no apology ever came. We knew we wouldn't get one, and that was fine. We didn't want friendship. We just wanted peace. So we ended the meeting clearly. We'd respect the legal lines, expect the same in return, and if there were any further false reports or harassment, we'd pursue legal action without hesitation. After that, Karen mostly kept to herself. But something had shifted in the neighborhood. Our stand against her had given people permission to speak up. Suddenly, residents were openly talking at HOA meetings, questioning policies, demanding transparency, and challenging years of unchecked authority. Karen's allies, other board members who had once operated like a mini shadow government, either resigned or were voted out. A new president took over, someone reasonable and fair, and they immediately began reviewing Karen's past actions. One of the first decisions, creating a clear map of HOA boundaries and publicly acknowledging which properties were exempt, including ours. Meanwhile, Emily and I began restoring the cabin even further. We added a small dock, planted a few apple trees, and even installed solar lights along the path to the lake. For the first time in years, the property felt like what it was meant to be: peaceful, welcoming, and free. Neighbors we barely knew stopped by to compliment the updates. One brought over a basket of tomatoes from his garden. Another asked if we'd be open to hosting a summer potluck. We agreed, And soon enough, our once contentious cabin became the center of real community spirit. No rules, no HOA, people enjoying the lake and looking out for one another. As for Karen, well, she became something of a ghost. Occasionally, we'd spot her walking her little dog along the road, never making eye contact. She didn't show up to the potluck, she wasn't seen at any of the new HOA board's open meetings. Word was, she'd lost the appetite for community politics after the embarrassment and backlash. Her house went up for sale quietly a few months later. No big for sale sign, just a small listing online. When it sold, the neighborhood practically threw a celebration. The new family who moved in, friendly, low-key, and happy to be away from any HOA drama. In the end, Karen's downfall wasn't dramatic, it was slow, quiet, and built entirely by her own doing. She alienated everyone, overreached her power, and tried to bully the wrong people. And when all that failed, she had nowhere to stand. The cabin, once a battleground, became a place of laughter, bonfires, and late-night stargazing. Emily and I still laugh sometimes, remembering that day Karen called the cops and told them my wife didn't belong on her own porch. That single moment lit the match that brought down her fake empire. So we let it go. No revenge, no drama, just peace. Because sometimes, the best revenge is simply living well on the land that someone else tried and failed to take away from you. After Karen sold her house and disappeared from the neighborhood, it felt like a fresh chapter had finally begun, not just for us, but for everyone who had lived under her shadow for years. There were no more surprise visits from clipboard board members, no more violation notices taped to gates, and definitely no more absurd complaints about flags, gnomes, or lawn chairs. It was peaceful in a way we hadn't experienced in a long time. But for me and Emily, the real victory wasn't just in Karen leaving. It was in how the community came together, how truth outshined intimidation, and how we managed to hold on to our dignity through it all. We never stooped to Karen's level. We didn't retaliate with lies or hostility. We stood our ground with facts, calm voices, and the truth on our side. And in the end, that's what brought her entire charade crashing down. The cabin felt different. Now, not physically, we didn't change the walls or furniture overnight, but the energy had shifted. It was no longer a place of conflict or anxiety. It became what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary. Every time we pulled into the driveway, there wasn't a pit in our stomach wondering if we'd find a new fake notice taped to the door. We didn't have to glance around the trees to see if Karen was lurking with her phone out, ready to take pictures of our son playing in the yard. The silence that replaced her presence wasn't awkward or unsettling. It was peaceful, like the land itself had exhaled after years of tension. We hosted another gathering a few weeks later, a small get-together with neighbors who had supported us through everything. It was nothing fancy, just a barbecue with burgers, grilled corn, some lemonade for the kids, and cold drinks for the grown-ups. And yet, it felt like a celebration. People swapped stories about classic Karen moments, from her trying to ban wind chimes to the time she fined a guy for planting the wrong color roses. We all laughed, not out of cruelty, but relief. She was gone. And with her went the fear and frustration that had hung in the air for too long. One older couple, the Harrisons, approached us before leaving that evening. The husband shook my hand and said, "Thanks for standing up. You know, we wanted to speak up for years, but we didn't know how. You two gave us a voice." That stuck. With me, all Emily and I wanted was to enjoy our own land in peace. Yet our simple act of defending our rights inspired others to find courage they didn't know they had. It was a ripple effect, and it changed the tone of the entire neighborhood. Even the HOA, now under fresh leadership, shifted into something more transparent and cooperative. We weren't involved, of course, since our cabin was legally outside their reach, but we saw the difference. The new board president, a down-to-earth woman named Teresa, introduced community surveys, open meetings, and a newsletter that focused on local events instead of listing infractions. It was like someone had taken the reins back from a runaway cart. As for the cabin, it continued to blossom. That summer, we finally built the small garden Emily had always dreamed of. We planted lavender, tomatoes, herbs, and even a few strawberries near the deck. Our son helped build a tiny birdhouse and painted it with all the colors of the rainbow. We put up string lights between the trees and built a firewood shed near the back. What had once been just a weekend retreat was now feeling more like a legacy, a place our son could grow up loving, where memories were being built one quiet morning at a time. But the most poetic part, we found the original hand-drawn cabin sketch from Emily's grandfather tucked away in an old storage trunk in the attic. His pencil marks were faded, but clear, his dream brought to life with sweat and sawdust. Long before any HOA existed, we framed it and hung it near the cabin's front door, a reminder of the roots that grounded us and the history that protected us. Emily often stood there, looking at it and smiling. "He'd be proud," she said once, and I believed her. Lessons we learned from Karen's chaos weren't easy, but they were valuable. We learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean shouting louder, it means being steady when someone else is trying to shake you. We learned that community isn't built by rules and regulations, it's built by kindness, respect, and connection. And most importantly, we learned that people like Karen may try to control everything, but eventually, their lies collapse under the weight of truth. Months later, we received a letter in the mail. It was from the new family who bought Karen's old house. They introduced themselves, Ben and Clara, with 2 kids, and apologized for not introducing themselves in person sooner. They also said they had heard interesting stories about the previous owner and wanted to assure us they were just looking to enjoy the lake and be good neighbors. Emily laughed and wrote back, "Welcome to freedom," with a drawing of a peace sign and a barbecue grill. Now, every time I sit on our deck, drink in hand, listening to the wind move through the trees and the distant laughter of neighbors, I think back to how it all started with a false accusation, a phone call to the police, and one woman's desperate need to feel powerful. Karen thought she could scare us, embarrass us, control us, but all she really did was bring the neighborhood together, reveal her own weaknesses, and reinforce the strength of our roots. Our cabin, our land, and our peace were never hers to take. They were hard-earned, deeply cherished, and legally protected. So while the sun sets behind the trees and our son roasts marshmallows over the fire pit, we hold no bitterness, no resentment, just a quiet satisfaction that we never gave in. We held the line, we told the truth, and we never backed down. And that made all the difference.